Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Rui, JINSA's Director of Foreign Policy. I'm happy to welcome you all to this week's Israel at War Update webinar. As usual, I'm privileged to be joined by JINSA Distinguished Fellow, retired IDF Major General Yaakov Amidror, and by JINSA's Julian and Jenny Josephson, Senior Vice President for Israeli Affairs, retired IDF Major General Yaakov Aish. A lot to
Good
get to
evening.
this week. As usual, a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, just type them in the Q&A box in the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to them in turn. So I want to start with events in and around Gaza, and then go on to Iran and other issues in the time we have. Let's start by talking about Israel's resumption of operations inside the Strip, but also by the scene in which that's taking place, the context. General Amidror, I'll start with you. So there's a lot of different ceasefire proposals sort of floating around. And at the same time, in the last week, we've seen Israel resume operations in Gaza against Hamas. So I'll start, as usual, by asking you a rather broad question. Are we definitely headed back to war? Is there a viability to return to a ceasefire before a resumption of full-scale hostilities, or are we past that point?
No, we didn't pass that point, but I don't know what will happen. Both Egypt and the Qataris tried to put pressure on Hamas to make a compromise and to be ready to release at least 5 Israelis. And for that would be an extension of the negotiations before and to give Israel the ability to negotiate without going to another part of the war, to the second part of the war. We are ready to this arrangement of the Qataris and the Egyptians. I'm not sure the Hamas wants it. And we are waiting to its answer. So we didn't cross the point of no return relating to the ability of both sides to extend the ceasefire. Not yet.
So I guess in order to get to maybe take a step back and return to a ceasefire, there's the proposal several weeks ago from the United States through Mr. Witkoff to basically extend phase one of the Gaza ceasefire. Is that acceptable at this point, or are we talking about something
No,
different?
that was refused by the Hamas. Israel agreed, and now there is a new proposal on the table. Theoretically, Israel didn't get it yet, but I believe that will be public. That will be put for instead of for Israel to decide. We need to be clear that the Hamas is ready to negotiate about it. Up till now, the brokers don't have an answer from Hamas.
And from Israel's perspective, just the last question on this issue, from Israel's perspective, where is the United States? Is it supporting Israel's determination, if it needs to go back in militarily? Is there a push to try to keep a ceasefire alive?
No, the Americans gave Israel a free hand, and they declare that they will accept whatever will be the Israeli policy. They understand it is complicated. They understood it after the refusal of Hamas to deal with the offer which was brought by the Americans. So they understand that it is a complicated situation, and they give Israel a free hand to decide.
Thank you. General Aish, I'll turn to you to ask more narrowly focused, perhaps strategic and operational questions about Gaza. So we've seen obviously some IDF airstrikes. We heard about that in last week's webinar against Hamas political leadership in particular, but not exclusively, and also the return of certain IDF forces to various points throughout the Gaza Strip. Could you tell our audience sort of what is the IDF's concept of operations for resuming operations against Hamas? Where do we go from here, assuming that the ceasefires fall through?
So we should remember that everything started from a violation of the ceasefire agreement with Hamas, which was by not releasing hostages on one hand and expecting the IDF to stay out of the Gaza Strip and not deal with the Hamas terrorist activities. After 2 weeks of that, the IDF that have prepared general operational plan to storm again Hamas inside the Gaza Strip and to complete the mission, decided to go for one portion of that general plan, operational plan, and by that to try to encourage Hamas to reconsider. And that portion was to go on their military leadership. It wasn't enough. They decided that they are not going to release the hostages. The IDF decided to increase pressure. And then they decided to move to the second phase. They went into Beit Lahiya, they went into Tel Sultan and Rafah, and it wasn't enough. And they decided to increase the pressure and to go on the what was left of their military infrastructure, where they were so proud with the pickups when they have released the hostages. So the IDF decided to eliminate that capability. First and foremost, it is a very symbolic move. And the second element is to prevent them from using it again to storm the Israeli border, which, by the way, was one of their intents. We had very clear intelligence and information that they're about to do that. And from that, you can understand that the program, that the operational plan that was built by the IDF is with increasing pressure, and all the political level have to do is to release the IDF to finish the mission. This is in terms of operations, what is going on in the Gaza Strip, hand in hand with very strong expectations for them to go back to the negotiation and to release the hostages, as General Amidro have described.
Thank you, General Aish. So if this will get into a couple of questions, if Hamas refuses to come back to the negotiating table, is this ultimately is this an IDF plan, or more broadly an Israeli plan or willingness to return to a goal we've heard stated before, which is eliminating Hamas militarily? If that's what it is.
The strategic goal is very clear, is on one hand to eliminate Hamas and to dismantle Hamas as a military organization, and the other hand is to release the hostages. And for that purpose, the IDF have a very clear grand plan. The way it's going to be implemented, we'll have to wait and see. It is flexible enough to the degree that they can either implement all of it, or they can implement part of it. Everything depends on those strategic goals and the progress should it happen. So far, we don't see any progress. We can see that side by side to all I've described, there is a growing pressure inside the Gaza Strip on Hamas leadership from the internal population. They are demonstrating. You can see demonstrations that we haven't seen in the last year and a half inside the Gaza Strip. I don't know how things are going to unfold, but this is part of the general idea, really to mount pressure on them. On one hand, to release the hostages, on the other hand, to reconsider their directions. Maybe they will put their weapons and decide that they are going to exile. I don't know. But the plan to increase pressure is there and it's viable.
So I want to come back to that issue of the protests we've seen in Gaza. We'll want to come back to that in a minute. But General Ice, just sort of one more follow-on question, and I'll do my best not to ask you to predict the future, because that's obviously unfair. Right now, where as it stands, how do you assess, perhaps on a general level, Hamas's military capabilities and their strategy? Obviously, as you mentioned, we saw with the hostage handovers during the ceasefire, Hamas was trying to portray itself as strong and resilient. And you mentioned the pickup trucks. How do you assess now their ability to and willingness to carry on the fight if it goes that way?
I'll be very careful here, but those who are following Jean's briefings and webinars in the last year and a half will remember that General Amdor and myself were talking about 4 elements that at the end of the day will allow the IDF to defeat and to dismantle Hamas. One was military leadership, the second military infrastructure, the third was their organization for battle, the famous 24 battalions, and the fourth was their ability really to administrate and to govern what is going on in the Gaza Strip. 3 out of those 4 elements were achieved, although they succeeded lately to recruit very, very young, I should say, very young terrorists to join them. You know, terrorists, I call them, but they are paid. They have no other choice but to join Hamas. They are not trained, not as equipped as they were. And keep in mind that with the Israeli presence, with the IDF presence on the Philadelphia axis in Rafah, they don't have their line of supplies open. So basically, they succeeded to do that. So in order to complete the mission is really to make sure that those organizations are dismantled. And the last point is really to remove Hamas as a threat, as an administration, as a governing power out of the Gaza Strip.
Thank you, General Aish. General Amador, I'll
If I
turn back.
may add,
Please,
to
yes.
General Aish, look, we begin to kind of resuming the operations almost 2 weeks ago. Mainly by fire, but here and there we are going with ground forces as well. Since then, Hamas succeeded to launch 7 missiles into Israel. That's all. And then produce even one raid operation, something that might be look like, you know, an organization which is ready to cope with the IDF. So everyone can make suggestion and quote numbers, and Hamas said that he recruited this number and they probably pay to another few people. At the end of the day, after 2 weeks, that's what they succeeded to produce. It's as evidence to how weak is Hamas and how irrelevant is Hamas as a threat to Israel. Can they launch another 10 missiles into Israel? Probably yes. By the way, the last 2 or 3 were launched by the Islamic Jihad, but it doesn't matter. I speak about both organizations in Gaza. They are not relevant as a threat to Israel. And what Israel has to make, that will not be a threat to any new partner or old partner inside the Gaza Strip. This is what we intend to do if the war will be resumed.
And thank you, General Amador. And to follow up, if the war is resumed, you know, we've heard reports, at least in American press, mostly by American analysts, that, you know, a resumed operation in Gaza would require, you know, 5 IDF divisions, 60,000 troops, things like that. You know, we'd love to get your thoughts on that, but it's a way of asking as well. We've also seen reports that there's concerns about IDF readiness for such an operation. Do you put any stock in that after a year and a half of war, or is that just trying to grab headlines?
I think that after a year and a half of war, most of it in urban areas, the IDF is more than prepared. The experience that they have, the lessons that they learn, the flexibility that they show, I believe that the IDF will never have been such ready for war in an urban area as it is today. Not because that was our plan. This is the result of the war. There is one weak issue here, is how we deal with the issue of the reserve forces, which serve between 200 and 400 days, depends on the unit. How we will do it with them, because we don't want to put too much pressure on them. About the number of units which are needed, look, unlike at the beginning of the war, we're not afraid from a second front in Lebanon. We know that Hezbollah is much, much, much weaker. So it makes the life of the decision makers easier to allocate more forces into Gaza. We need forces in the West Bank, still in Judea and Samaria. We need a strong defense in Lebanon and to keep some units in the Golan Heights. But basically, the threat from the borders is much less than it had been in the 6th of October and during the first part of the war. But after neutralizing almost all the abilities of Hezbollah and the Iranian, well, understanding that they are very vulnerable and they don't want to take the risk, I believe that the IDF can allocate as many forces as will be needed to make the job in Gaza.
So I want to get to Iran next, but just right before we get there, obviously want to ask about your perspective on these protests we're seeing in Gaza the past couple of days. Now, as we mentioned, there were protests in past years, even in 2023 before October 7th, inside Gaza against Hamas that were mostly, from what I understand, about economic conditions, quality of life issues in Gaza. So as using that as a frame, General Amador, I'll ask you first. What's your perspective on these protests that we're seeing? Does this show a lack of Hamas control? Do you put a lot of hope or stock in these protests, or is it? Do we have to wait and see what if anything comes of this?
First of all, we have to wait and see. We don't know what will happen. It's not big enough to change the regime in Gaza, but it's first time that people from Gaza are ready to call Hamas to stop the war and are speaking with the media guys about the evil system of Hamas and about the fact that Hamas made the people of Gaza to suffer, and they don't want Hamas. So this is first time. Is it strong enough to change the situation? Probably not, but it is a very encouraging phenomena to see that people in Gaza understand that Hamas is the source of all the problems that they are facing, and they are facing huge problems.
Let me add on that,
Please, yes,
Jonathan, with your permission, only one thing. At the moment, we will see Hamas starting to shoot the protesters in their knees or somewhere else. It means that it's going to be that the protest is very effective. So far, it's important. However, I'm not sure to what extent. They are watching it very carefully, monitoring it very carefully, and they understand that it is part of the economic pressure mounted on them. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's at the level that it's going to change the situation inside yet.
So I'd like to turn to Iran now. There's a lot we can discuss, but I guess General Aisha, I'll start with you. So in recent days and weeks, obviously, there's been a whole bunch of diplomatic dancing between the United States and Iran over the potential for negotiations and what happens if there are none. And we saw the Trump administration give Iran a 2-month deadline to agree to a deal. So we have some sense maybe of what America's clock is. But I'd love if you could tell our audience what Israel's clock is, what the sense from Israel is of what to do with all these diplomatic back and forths, and especially what we've heard from Iran, which strikes me as saying, well, they want to play for time. They want to drag out. Right now, they want to negotiate about having negotiations. And as Jinsa has said in a lot of its publications, time is certainly on Iran's side, the more they can drag this out. And we've also heard plenty of reporting in the press that Israel has a sense of opportunity and maybe even urgency to deal with the problem one way or another that goes against that. So I would just love to get your perspectives on what's the pulse in Israel right now in terms of all these things going on between the U.S. and Iran.
Okay, so I think when we are thinking about the type of negotiations that are conducted with Iran right now, we should think what are the terms, what are the regional terms. We should keep in mind that this is after Hezbollah was shattered in the north. We should remember that Hamas, which was also a proxy, is almost ineffective militarily. We should remember that the Houthis in Yemen are under a constant US and allies attack as well. And Iran by itself was very ineffective in their offense and very ineffective in air defensive, in her defensive capabilities, to the extent that they have lost significant part of their air and missile defense. So this is the environment that this negotiation are taking place. It doesn't matter how, it doesn't matter who exactly negotiate, it doesn't matter what kind of letters were shared with whom, but their state of mind when they are going into it is as there is a very big stick above their head called the US, and there is another stick, not as big as the US, that is also above their head. And we are talking here about a stick that have proven itself quite effective. So the circumstances where everything starts are totally different. They have built their proxies in the region for 20 years in order to create a first tier and second tier against Israel to prevent Israel from being able to attack them. Those tiers, most of them are shattered significantly. So these are the circumstances. And now I'll go into the situation inside. Having said that, the US have published that Iran, and I don't want to go to all the technical details, is not far from being nuclear capable in terms of sufficient quantities, in terms of being able really to process it, and maybe in the future to weaponize it. So all those signals are very clear that no one is messing around with the Iranians, and these negotiations are very serious, are very urgent, and are very precise. They are not going to be given any time to play with the international community and all the US as they did many times before. So I think even if we are talking about those negotiations, when we are thinking about the deployments, that some of them are published around the Indian Ocean and elsewhere, I think the picture is very clear to the Iranians, even if they are trying to show, as yesterday and the day before yesterday, that they have those tunnels and they have some capabilities in those tunnels, etc., etc., etc.
Thank you, General Aish, and
If I may add one sentence.
please, General Ambro, yes.
I think if you look at it from far away and above, and you say one sentence is it's kind of in one sentence in a nutshell. At the end of the day, Iran didn't deliver. It didn't deliver after a year of war that Hamas almost had been destroyed totally. 3 months in which Hezbollah lost its capabilities. Few weeks during which they lost Syria. The Iraqis ordered the militias not to launch missiles into Israel or drones, and since the end of October they don't. The Houthis are under constant attack by the Americans. Where is Iran? So when you look at it, you understand that the Iranians have to understand that they lost the strategy. It doesn't exist. And the only corner which remained that they might give them some comfort is the nuclear one. But here, as General Aish rightly said, the stick of the Americans and the stick of the Israelis is above them. And they understand that if they will go too far, both countries might use it as an excuse to attack the Iranians. And I'm not sure that they are ready to make the test.
So thank you, General Amador. So to that point, when 10 years ago, when the JCPOA was being negotiated, as long as talks were going on, it certainly seemed like there was at least implicit pressure on Israel not to endanger talks by conducting military action. Today, you mentioned there's the combination. You both mentioned there's a combination of the U.S. and Israeli sticks, but also if you're the Iranians, now you have every incentive to try to work even closer to a bomb because it's the best tool you have remaining. Do you have the perception that the U.S. and Israel have those, as I was talking about, those same clocks, the same sense of urgency to deal with the problem, or is it the possibility that the U.S. may continue trying to talk through this, and Israel may have a different sense of urgency to deal with the problem differently?
Look, it will be very almost impossible to believe that someone sitting in Washington, looking around the world about issues which might endanger the American interest, and Israeli who is sitting in Jerusalem looking at the same question, will reach the same conclusion. It's natural that someone who is far away don't see it as the one who is very close to. But I think that basically America and Israel are on the same page about the need to be better prepared if will be a need to stop Iran for not letting Iran to have nuclear missile capability. How close exactly about the details they are, I don't know, and it probably changed from piece of intelligence to piece of intelligence. But basically, they are on the same page. The fact that they are on the same page of the assessment of the threat doesn't hint that they are on the same page relating to the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Here, as a superpower, America looks at it in a different way than Israel, and it's also very natural. I think that it is very important that Israel, whatever Israel is going to do, it will be coordinated with the Americans. We don't have to ask them permission. We don't have to agree to do something together, but it should be coordinated with the Americans. America should not be surprised by a big Israeli operation. It will be bad if in Washington they understand that Israel is going to do something when they see the 500 airplanes on the sky. No, we should coordinate with the Americans. It doesn't mean that we have to agree, but we should not surprise. And I think that this publication of the American assessment of the ability of the Iranians to be very close so easily now is very significant, and maybe the visit of General Kurila in Israel is connected to this understanding. And the Americans are there anyhow. They just have to change the ticket from Sana to Tehran, and they will be there.
So you mentioned, yes, General.
So Jonathan, let me try and guess the direction from a different angle. I'm not there in the room. Minister Dermer was just in the US together with the National Security Advisor, Tzachi Hanegbi, and General Kurila is about to arrive, and everything is very constant. Let's take a look at the last months, what have happened. One, there was a huge, according to foreign resources, there was a very big IAF, Israeli Air Force exercise. Someone was saying that this is a kind of rehearsal for Iran. When you are analyzing the intense flight of strategic bombers to Diego Garcia and elsewhere in the Indian Ocean, and you are just analyzing those activities together with the publication made today by the US about Iran's nuclear project, it seems like the leadership over here and the policymakers in the US are not far from understanding the situation in the same way. The big question will be how they are going to approach it. And it seems like they are analyzing and they are not excluding any tool out of their options.
Thank you, General Aish. It's a very helpful framing, and certainly anyone who's followed along with Jinsa's work over the years has certainly heard this phrase before. But the importance of no daylight between the United States and Israel. So I think that a great summation of that point yet again. Just a few minutes before I'll let you both go, I want to cover a couple other issues. First is a question from our audience. General Amador, I'll ask this to you first, but I'll open up to both of you. Do you think the current peace demonstrations in Israel could impede the effectiveness or readiness of the IDF? I know this is a question that came up before October 7th, and has maybe not appeared as much, but would love to get your thoughts on that if you have any.
If we have one lesson about that issue from the war in October 23, is that in Israel, people know how to make a clear separation between political demonstrations and the need to fight. And people which even demonstrated against each other found themselves after 48 hours at the same tank fighting together, as there was no even one problem. There is one change in the policy now, and it is regarding those who threat to refuse to come to serve. The decision here is different from what happened before the war, and everyone who is saying it in public is getting his release immediately, and
no tolerance.
Thank you very much. We don't need you. We will manage without you. And I think it's very important, different attitude, and it will minimize the number of those who will refuse. At the end of the day, with these forces based on the reserve soldiers, you cannot force them at the end. At the end, they are civilians. And after 400 days in which they lost businesses, many places in universities, they lost a lot of information. So at the end of the day, this is the positive side of this system and the negative side of this system.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone can be forced to come, but those which are coming are ready to sacrifice everything. Otherwise, they wouldn't come. And I think that was in this stage we are still in good position. Less people are coming than at the beginning of the war, but if the war will be resumed, we will see immediately higher percentage of reserve which are ready to serve whatever is needed.
So just a very quick follow-up, General Amador. You mentioned that within Israel, these divisions, that could be seen in the protests, those disappeared after October 7th. The country came together, and you mentioned that could happen again if the country goes back to war. However, one might say that Hamas and other adversaries before October 7th mistook that internal debate and division that happens in democracy. They mistook that as weakness and opportunity. Are you worried that could happen again in some form?
Maybe they made this mistake, but I think if they had done this mistake, they probably learned from the results that it was a mistake.
So, General Aish, I gave General Amador the first question. I'll give you the final one. We just saw that the Israeli government approved a new $200 billion state budget, which included increases in defense spending, among other things. And we've been hearing ever since October 7th that Israel is going to, for many reasons, needs to ramp up its defense spending. Is there anything in this latest budget that in terms of the defense sector, anything that stands out to you as noteworthy for our audience?
Well, I think there is one element that we in GINSA are dealing with in the last 2 years, I should say, before the war. And right now, it's even further important. The Israeli budget, and General Amidror can elaborate on that, is one element in order to allow the IDF not only to replenish itself, but really to reform itself according to a new defense doctrine that will allow Israel to defend itself by itself, as we did in the last 77 years. Having said that, there is another element which is a very important complementary element that allow the IDF to do bold and major moves as we did in the last decades. And it's called the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding between Israel and the US, that allow Israel really to rebuild mainly its air force with them aircrafts, helicopters, KC-46s, the refuelers, C-130Js that will allow us to mobilize our forces very fast from one area to other, and many other major items. On that, we in Israel usually mount other capabilities that are developed here. Some of them are command control, some of them are electronic warfare, some of them are highly sensitive technologies that are tailored to the challenges that we are facing here in our region. And this is a complementary move that we will have to work together with our American colleagues to complement Israel's defense budget. And from that, it will allow us, on one hand, to implement the lessons that we have had from 7 fronts that we haven't discussed all of them during this session, and really to make sure that we are preparing ourselves not to the previous war, but to the future war. And I'll finish by one sentence. Take a look at what is going on between Russia and Ukraine. Take a look at the number of drones and many other elements, and you would understand that the challenges that we are about to face in the future are overwhelming. And for that, we will need more and more resources and technologies that hopefully we'll be able to develop together with our American colleagues.
Thank you. General Amador, any final comments you have on
It's
the budget issue?
just two cents. One, the present agreement, which I'm very proud. I had the privilege to begin the negotiations with the Americans about, and to decide that we are asking for more money because we are exchanging or changing the whole Air Force of Israel during those years. Is going to will be ended in 2028,
Mhm.
2028, and it is time now to negotiate about the second stage. All the money we can spend only in America, only for military purposes, and it's very important to emphasize.
Thank you. And that's,
Thank you.
I couldn't imagine two people better equipped to speak about U.S.-Israel bilateral defense cooperation MOUs than the two people I'm lucky enough to have on the Zoom today. Thank you both, as always, for joining us. I know it's late in Israel. Thank you again to our audience, as always, for joining us. And stay tuned. We look forward to seeing you again next week on the next GINSA webinar. Take care, everyone.